Imagine you're in the middle of a really bitter, incredibly high-stakes child custody battle.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the tension there is just, it's off the charts.
Right. And you're sitting in this sterile, fluorescent-lit clinic room, just staring down at a thick booklet.
Mm.
And it's got 567 true or false questions.
That is a lot of questions to process.
It is. And your mind is just racing. So you decide right then and there that you are going to outsmart this piece of paper.
Which is a very natural human impulse, honestly.
Exactly. You tell yourself, I'm going to answer every single question in a way that makes me look like, the most patient, flawless, emotionally stable human being to ever walk the earth.
Right, like you're just perfect.
Right. But what you don't realize, as you confidently fill in that very first double, is that the test is already watching you lie.
Yeah, it's waiting for you.
It actually has these built-in mathematical traps waiting specifically for people trying to look perfect. So welcome to the deep dive.
It's essentially the ultimate psychological surveillance mechanism, right? Just hiding in plain sight as a multiple choice test.
Exactly. And today, we are taking you, our listeners, straight under the hood of that exact machine.
We really are.
We're exploring what is probably the most ambitious attempts in human history to build an X-ray for the human psyche. I mean, we're looking at the MMPI-2.
The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory.
That's the one. But we aren't using some standard dusty academic textbook today, are we?
No, not at all. And that's what brings a completely unique flavor to this exploration.
It really does.
Our source material today is this fascinating, slightly rogue document. It's called the Unofficial MMPI-2 Supermanual.
Yeah, the origin of this thing is wild. It was compiled back in 2018 by this internet user who goes by the handle Sky509.
Right. And they describe themselves as having a background in psychology, and they claim to have this exceptional accuracy in scoring and interpreting this highly complex test.
But what makes this compilation so compelling is the framing, right? Like the disclaimer at the very beginning is just unforgettable.
Oh, absolutely. It sets the tone immediately.
Yeah, Sky509 explicitly states that they compiled this massive guide from various internet archives, and then they literally write, use this manual however you wish, but do not let it fall into the hands of any authority figure as I enjoy my freedom.
Which is such a striking thing to read in a psychological manual.
Right. And they even add this cheeky note that if an authority figure somehow is reading it, it should just be considered an art project for entertainment purposes only.
It's brilliant contrast. I mean, you have a test that is the bedrock of forensic psychology, clinical diagnosis, high-level security clearances.
Right, the real heavy-duty stuff.
Exactly. And it's being decoded by someone who actively wants to fly under the radar of institutional authority.
Yeah, but regardless of this compiler's persona, the actual data they've assembled is incredibly rich.
Very rich and entirely empirical. It's deeply revealing about how the test actually operates.
So our mission today is to decode those mechanics. We're going to look at how this test catches liars, how it measures invisible pain, and how it maps out the geography of human sadness.
It's quite a journey.
It is. We'll be walking through the test's built-in validity scales, and then we're diving deep into 3 specific clinical scales: hypochondriasis, depression, and hysteria.
Which are fascinating to unpack.
Yeah, so if you've ever wondered how professionals actually measure the invisible architecture of mental health, or, how a piece of paper can seemingly read your deepest defenses, you are definitely in the right place.
But to really understand how this works, we have to start before the test booklet is even opened.
Wait, before they even see the questions?
Yes, exactly. The manual is very clear that the MMPI-2 is completely useless and potentially dangerous, actually, if it's administered in a vacuum.
Okay, so you don't just hand someone 567 questions and let a computer spit out a judgment.
No, absolutely not. The process begins with something called the therapeutic history form.
And this form, looking at the source, it is intensely granular.
Oh, it leaves no stone unturned.
Right. It doesn't just ask for your name, age, and occupation. It demands the exact chronology of your childhood moves.
It asks about your birth order, too.
Yeah, and it specifically asks what kind of person your father was. And it gives this list of adjectives that just pull no punches.
It's very direct.
It really is. It asks if he was warm, present, strict, overprotective, cruel, playful, alcoholic, or mentally ill. it is seriously digging for roots.
Because the test ultimately provides a structural framework of a person's current psychology, right?
Okay.
But the history form provides the meaning behind that structure. The manual emphasizes the search for what it calls early conditioning experiences.
Conditioning experiences, so how we were wired.
Exactly. Conditioning is the mechanism by which our early environment physically and neurologically wires our defense mechanisms.
Okay, let me push back on that for a second, because I can imagine someone listening right now feeling a bit confused.
Sure, go ahead.
If the MMPI-2 is the most scientifically researched, objectively validated personality test in the world, why do we need this highly subjective narrative history?
That's a really good question.
Right. I mean, if you go to a doctor with a broken arm, they don't need to know if your father was a playful drunk or a cruel drunk to look at the X-ray and see the fracture. Why does this test need so much backstory?
Well, that's a fundamental distinction to make. A physical X-ray measures a tangible reality that exists completely independently of your thoughts.
Right. Broken bone is just a broken bone.
Exactly, whether you are in denial about it or not. But psychological assessment measures a reality that is entirely constructed by your thoughts, your history, and your self-awareness.
Okay. That makes sense.
Let's use an example straight from the manual. Suppose the test results come back and they show an incredibly high level of emotional numbness and defensiveness.
Okay.
The computer can tell you the numbness is there, but it cannot tell you the etiology. It can't give you the origin story.
Which is exactly where that history form steps in.
Yes. So if the history form reveals that this person went through a horrific, unexpected divorce 6 months ago,
then that emotional numbness is probably just an acute, temporary survival mechanism, right?
precisely, it's a psychological shock blanket.
Right.
But if the history form reveals a childhood defined by a highly critical, raging alcoholic parent,
Oh, wow. Then that exact same score means something entirely different.
entirely different. Now, that numbness is a deeply entrenched, lifelong personality structure that was built to survive a volatile environment.
But the numbers on the test are identical.
Exactly. The numbers are identical, but the clinical reality and the way you would actually treat that person are worlds apart.
The manual actually highlights how specific occupations mentioned in the history form change the baseline, too.
Yes, it calibrates the context.
Like, it points out that growing up as a child of a migrant farm worker brings a radically different level of baseline financial and physical insecurity than, say, growing up as the child of a wealthy physician.
Right. You absolutely have to calibrate the instrument to the reality of the patient's lived experience.
Which brings us to the actual introduction of the test.
This part is crucial. Psychological testing is a highly vulnerable and often terrifying experience for the client.
Yeah, I'd be terrified.
Right. So the manual provides a very specific script for the clinician to use to bring the client's defenses down.
It tells the practitioner to say, there are 567 items. It typically takes about 1 to 2 hours, but you can take as long as you need.
And then it emphasizes something that completely changes the power dynamic in the room.
Yeah, it insists that the results will be a collaborative discussion. It's not this top-down, I am the doctor and I will now tell you what is wrong with your brain kind of situation.
It absolutely cannot be top-down. If you approach a client with absolute unyielding authority, their natural psychological defense mechanisms will immediately engage.
They'll just shut down.
They will hide. They will obscure. In fact, the manual actually encourages the practitioner to invite the client to record the feedback session.
Wait, really? To record it?
Or to take detailed notes. It's all about establishing profound transparency. The clinician tells the client, if my interpretation of your test results doesn't sound quite right to you, we will work together to refine it.
That collaborative approach is fascinating. But, I mean, it also feels like a bit of a psychological chess move, doesn't it?
How so?
Because by making them comfortable, by actively lowering their guard, you're actually trying to get a cleaner, more honest data set out of them.
Well, that is certainly part of the architecture, yes.
But of course, human beings are complicated. Even when they're totally comfortable, they still lie. Sometimes they lie to the doctor, and sometimes they're just lying to themselves.
Which is exactly why the developers of the test built an internal security system.
Right.
Once the pencil hits the paper, the surveillance begins. The MMPI-2 doesn't just evaluate what you answer, it evaluates exactly how you answer it.
It measures the very act of test-taking itself.
Yep.
The detectives of the mind. The validity scales. Honestly, this is one of the most brilliant architectural feats of the test.
It really is an elegant system.
Let's start with the most basic mechanical trap, the cannot say scale, which is just represented on the scoring sheet by a simple question mark.
This is essentially a raw count of every single item the client either left blank or somehow answered as both true and false.
Okay, but in a test of 567 questions, missing one or two is statistically meaningless, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
You might just accidentally skip a line on the bubble sheet, but the manual establishes hard thresholds.
Right. It states that if a person leaves 10 items blank, the clinician needs to proceed with extreme caution.
Yes.
And if they hit 30 blank items, the entire test is completely invalid. You literally just throw it out.
You do.
But why 30? Like, what does that specific threshold tell us about the person's mind sitting in that room?
Well, leaving that many questions blank is a massive behavioral tell. It usually indicates one of three things.
Okay, what's the first?
First, severe clinical depression or fatigue. The cognitive fog is so thick, the person literally cannot summon the energy to make a binary choice.
Oh, wow. They just can't do it. Okay, what's the second?
Second is profound indecisiveness. This might be driven by an obsessive-compulsive need to perfectly understand every nuance of a question before answering.
Which is impossible when you're dealing with these broad statements.
Exactly. And third, and this is most common in forensic settings, it's a form of passive-aggressive defiance.
Defiance, like they're just refusing to play along.
Yes. The person refuses to commit to an answer because they are absolutely terrified of how the data will be used against them.
They're essentially pleading the fifth on a personality test.
Precisely. And if they do that 30 times, the mathematical integrity of all the remaining questions collapses.
Wow. Okay, but let's say they do answer everything.
Yeah.
The next layer of security involves these item response inconsistency scales.
Right, known as Trin and Vline.
Trin and Vrine. Honestly, it sounds like a pair of eccentric scientists.
It does, a bit.
But these are the scales that catch the lazy test takers and the random bubblers.
Let's look at the mechanics of how these actually work. TI stands for True Response Inconsistency.
Okay.
It is specifically designed to catch someone who is just answering true to everything or false to everything without actually reading the content.
And VRIN.
VN stands for Variable Response Inconsistency, which catches completely random answering.
So imagine someone gets to question 400, they're exhausted, their eyes are crossing, and they just decide to make a nice zigzag pattern down the rest of the Scantron sheet just to get out of the clinic.
Right, we've all been tempted by the zigzag.
How does VRIN actually catch that mathematically, though?
It uses paired questions that are scattered far apart in the booklet. The architects of the test found pairs of items that possess identical or completely opposite psychological meaning.
Oh, I see.
For example, item 40 might say, I wake up feeling rested most mornings, but then item 350 might say, my sleep is fitful and I wake up exhausted.
Okay, so if you answer true to both of those.
The VRIN scale flags a contradiction.
Right, because you can't be well-rested and exhausted at the exact same time.
Exactly. Now, one or two contradictions are normal. Maybe you just misread a double negative.
Yeah.
But if the VRIN score elevates significantly, the mathematical conclusion is undeniable. The person is not processing the semantic meaning of the words, so the test is invalid.
Now, before we go deeper into the specific scores that indicate lying or distress, we really need to pause and explain a piece of terminology that the manual uses constantly.
Yes, the T-scores.
Right. It keeps referring to T-scores. It says things like, if the T-score is over 65, or if the T-score drops below 45.
It's the metric for everything.
So for a listener who hasn't taken a graduate statistics class, how should they visualize a T-score?
Think of a T-score as a standardized measuring stick. It allows us to compare apples to oranges across completely different psychological traits.
Okay.
In this system, a T-score of 50 represents the exact mathematical average of the general population.
So 50 is dead center normal.
Yes, and every 10 points represents one standard deviation away from that average.
I see.
So if you score a 60, you are noticeably above average. If you hit a T-score of 65, you are essentially in the top 7 or 8% of the population for that specific trait.
Oh, wow.
You're moving into statistically unusual territory. And a T-score of 80 or 90 means you are an extreme statistical outlier.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. 50 is the baseline, 65 is the warning light, and 80 is the siren.
That's a great way to put it.
So armed with that measuring stick, let's look at the scales designed to catch the people who are actively trying to manipulate their image. The faking good scales.
Right.
And the most famous of these is simply called the L scale, which stands for lying.
The L scale is a 15-item cluster, and it's designed to measure what psychologists call naive defensiveness.
Naive defensiveness. What does that look like?
It's a rather unsophisticated attempt to present oneself as morally flawless, perfectly self-controlled, and completely immune to the minor, commonplace frailties that define the human condition.
Right. And the items on the L scale are just so perfectly engineered. Let me read a couple from the manual.
Go for it.
Okay. One says, "At times I feel like swearing." If you answer false to that, you get a point on the L scale.
Right.
Or, here's another, "I do not read every editorial in the newspaper every day."
That one is classic.
If you answer false to that, which means you are boldly claiming that you do read every single editorial in every single newspaper every single day, that's a point.
What is fascinating about the construction of the L scale is that it relies on the admission of trivial flaws.
Yeah.
It is mathematically banking on the fact that an honest person, even a very good person, will admit to occasionally feeling angry or occasionally procrastinating or occasionally wanting to swear.
We all do it.
Exactly. But the naive liar believes that admitting any flaw will result in a negative judgment, so they just deny everything.
The manual points out a really interesting educational dynamic here, too.
Yes, the correlation with education.
It notes that highly educated or psychologically sophisticated people almost never elevate the L scale. They see right through the trap.
They do. They know that claiming to be a perfect saint actually makes them look highly suspicious, so they readily admit to wanting to swear or gossiping occasionally.
But when we do see a highly elevated L score, like a T score jumping over 65, it paints a very specific clinical picture, doesn't it?
It does. And this isn't just someone telling a quick fib. The manual describes these individuals as rigid, conventional, intensely judgmental of others, and lacking any meaningful psychological insight.
Wow.
They view the world in absolute black and white terms.
So the clinician then has to play detective again.
Always.
They have to figure out, is this person consciously lying because they're in a high-stakes situation, like our custody battle example from the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this an unconscious personality structure?
That is the crucial pivot point in the interpretation. Sometimes a high L score isn't a conscious lie at all. It is a genuine, rigid, moralistic worldview. The manual suggests that when clinicians see an unconsciously high L score, they should look back at the history form for childhood environments that demanded strict, unyielding goodness.
So if a person was raised by highly punitive parents, where any minor infraction was met with severe consequence.
Yes. Then they develop a survival mechanism of absolute denial regarding their own normal human impulses.
I love that distinction. It's the difference between trying to trick the doctor and trying to trick yourself.
Very well said.
But if the L scale catches the amateurs, the K scale catches the professionals.
Ah, yes. The K scale, which stands for defensiveness, is truly a masterpiece of psychometric design.
Okay, tell us about the K scale.
Well, it evaluates some of the exact same underlying concepts as the L scale, but it does so with incredible subtlety.
Right, it measures sophisticated defensiveness. These are the people who want to portray themselves as remarkably well-adjusted, incredibly competent, and emotionally unflappable.
Exactly. The K scale looks at how tightly a person controls their emotional expression. High scorers on the K scale are emotionally constricted. They forcefully deny experiencing psychological distress, keeping this psychological stiff upper lip.
Let's take that further, because the way I conceptualize this is through a dating analogy.
Oh, I'd love to hear this.
So the L scale is like someone sitting across from you on a first date, looking you dead in the eye, and claiming they have never been angry in their entire life.
Right, it's an unsophisticated, obvious lie.
Exactly, and your alarm bells ring immediately.
Okay.
The K scale. The K scale is like someone in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit, leaning back and saying, you know, I don't really experience anger. I prefer to manage interpersonal conflicts through rational, measured discourse.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The tailored suit analogy worked perfectly because the K-scale defense is socially acceptable.
Right, it sounds great.
It is. It's rewarded in the corporate world. It's rewarded in leadership. The statement sounds mature. It sounds polished. But underneath, it is still fundamentally a mechanism to hide human messiness.
The manual spends a lot of time on how to interpret an elevated K score, because it doesn't automatically invalidate the test, does it?
Oh, not at all.
A high K score might just indicate that the person is heavily defended, relying on rationalization and intellectualization to avoid feeling vulnerable.
And that leads directly to the third faking good scale mentioned in the source material, which really pushes this concept to its absolute limit.
The S scale.
Yes, the superlative self-presentation scale.
The origin story of the S scale is wild. The manual notes it was developed using a sample group of airline pilot applicants.
Yes, it was.
Why on earth do they use airline pilots to build a personality scale?
Because the test developers needed a baseline for extreme emotional control.
Oh, sure.
If you think about the psychological profile required to fly a commercial jet carrying hundreds of people through a severe thunderstorm, you want someone who does not panic.
Right. No irritability, complete emotional equilibrium.
Exactly. When they tested these pilot applicants, the group produced profiles reporting virtually zero psychological symptoms. They genuinely perceive themselves as serene, patient, and infinitely reasonable.
So the S scale acts like a hypersensitive K scale.
It does.
It measures an almost Zen-like belief in human goodness and personal serenity.
Yes.
But wait, if someone scores incredibly high on the S scale, how do we know they aren't just genuinely a calm, wonderful person?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, isn't it possible to just be exceptionally well-adjusted without it being a defense mechanism?
Well, it's mathematically possible, but statistically, it is highly improbable to have zero friction in the human experience.
Ah, I see.
The clinician's job is to discern whether this S score represents true, hard-won serenity or massive self-deception.
And the manual provides a massive clue for this, doesn't it?
It does, a very telling clue.
It notes that when people with extreme S scores actually end up in therapy, it is almost never their own idea.
Never. They don't think anything is wrong.
Right. They are dragged into therapy by a spouse or a partner who is completely exasperated.
Because what feels like flawless serenity to the pilot feels like an impenetrable ice wall of emotional unavailability to their partner.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. The partner is crying, expressing deep emotional needs, and the high S scorer is looking at them with a calm, rational, completely disconnected stare.
Just wonder why everyone else is so irrational.
Exactly. The defense mechanism is functioning perfectly, but it's destroying their relationships.
That is heavy. So we have the scales that catch the people pretending to be perfect.
Right.
Now we have to flip the coin. What about the people who are desperate to look like they're falling apart?
The faking bad scales.
Yes, primarily the F scale, which stands for infrequency.
The F scale is comprised of 60 items that are almost never endorsed by the general population.
These are bizarre, extreme statements, right?
Extremely bizarre.
We're talking about items like, I have a cough most of the time. Answered true.
Or a broader statement like, I am liked by most people who know me. Answered false.
So if a person's F scale shoots up, say a T score soaring over 80 or 100, it means they were endorsing an incredibly high number of these rare extreme symptoms.
Yes. And when a clinician sees an F score that high, the interpretive waters become very murky, very quickly.
Why is that?
There are several competing hypotheses that must be untangled. The first is malingering.
Malingering. So the conscious, intentional faking of severe psychiatric illness.
Exactly.
Like someone trying to fake insanity to avoid a prison sentence, or someone exaggerating an injury to get a massive payout in a disability lawsuit.
Yes. They believe that by checking every single crazy or sick-sounding box, they will convince the doctor they are deeply unwell.
But the test catches them.
Because what they don't realize is that true psychiatric patients rarely endorse all of those items. The malingerer overplays their hand, and the F scale catches the statistical absurdity of their symptom cluster.
But the manual explicitly warns clinicians not to jump to the conclusion of malingering.
It does. It says an elevated F score doesn't automatically mean they are a liar.
And this is where the empathy of the diagnostic process comes in, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because a massively elevated F score is also exactly what you see when a patient is experiencing a genuine, terrifying psychotic break.
Oh, wow.
If a person is currently experiencing auditory hallucinations, severe paranoia, and a detachment from consensus reality, they will endorse bizarre items because their daily reality is currently bizarre.
That makes total sense. The manual also introduces a concept here that I found incredibly poignant. It says a high F score can sometimes be a plea for help.
The plea for help is a very real phenomenon.
What does that look like in the testing room?
It's a situation where a patient is genuinely suffering, perhaps from severe anxiety or depression, but they are terrified the doctor won't believe them. They feel invisible.
Right.
So subconsciously or consciously, they exaggerate their symptoms on the test. They turn the volume knob of their pain up to an 11 to ensure the clinician pays attention. It's a desperate signal flare.
So how does the test tell the difference between the malingerer, the psychotic patient, and the person crying for help?
It relies on subvariations of the F scale.
Okay, break those down for us.
For instance, the manual details the F-back scale, the back-in frequency scale. This specifically looks at the items in the second half of the 567-question booklet.
Oh, because if a person is legitimately answering honestly, but their EV scale suddenly spikes in the last 200 questions.
It might just mean they ran out of psychological stamina, test fatigue set in, they lost focus, or the stress of the test triggered a collapse in their coping skills midway through.
Right.
Furthermore, we look at the FP scale, the infrequency psychopathology scale. This is a highly refined tool.
How does that one work?
The developers found items that even severely psychotic hospitalized patients rarely endorse. So if a person's standard F scale is high, but their FP scale remains relatively low, the clinician can confidently assume this is a genuine severe psychiatric crisis.
But if both F and FP are soaring off the chart?
Then the person is claiming symptoms that even deeply unwell people don't experience. That points heavily toward exaggeration or malingering.
It is a complete matrix of truth-telling. The test cross-references your answers to see if you are lying to it, lying to yourself, panicking, or actually experiencing psychosis.
It's remarkably thorough.
But catching a liar or catching a defense mechanism is only half the battle.
Exact.
Once you strip away that tailored suit of the K scale or the naive perfection of the L scale, you are left with the raw nerve of the patient's actual underlying pain.
The core issues.
Right. And historically, the most common way human beings express unresolved psychological pain isn't through crying. It is through their physical bodies.
Which leads us to the intersection of the mind and the physical form. We are looking at clinical scale 1, known as hypochondriasis, and clinical scale 3, hysteria.
These two scales are inextricably linked.
They really are.
The manual notes that out of their dozens of questions, they actually share 20 overlapping items. Both scales are fundamentally concerned with somatic, physical complaints. Let's start with scale 1, hypochondriasis.
Okay.
This is a 32-item scale dealing entirely with bodily concerns.
Yes, we're looking at items like parts of my body often have feelings like burning, tingling, crawling.
Right.
To understand the scale, we have to look at how it was empirically built.
Yeah, the criterion group.
The developers didn't sit in a room and theorize about what a hypochondriac might say. They went out and found a criterion group of 50 inpatients who had pure, uncomplicated hypochondriasis.
Meaning these were patients who had an obsessive, abnormal concern over their health, but who had been subjected to endless medical and neurological screenings that proved there was absolutely no organic physical illness present.
Correct. The hardware was fine. Scale 1 measures the sheer volume of bodily complaints a person claims.
Okay.
And crucially, it measures the degree to which they adamantly deny possessing good physical health.
So when the scale elevates, it paints a picture of someone who uses physical symptoms, whether they are entirely imagined or minor sensations magnified by anxiety, as a tool.
Yes.
A tool for what?
For manipulation and for avoidance.
Oh.
The high scale 1 individual uses their mysterious stomach pains or chronic fatigue to manipulate the behavior of those around them, demanding care and accommodation.
Right.
Simultaneously, the physical illness serves as an impenetrable shield against dealing with their actual psychological difficulties. You can't expect them to go to couples therapy or address their deep-seated insecurities. They're simply too sick.
The manual portrays these patients as incredibly difficult to treat. It says they are generally cynical, pessimistic, and completely lacking in psychological insight.
They are very challenging.
If a doctor runs a scan, finds nothing, and gently suggests that perhaps stress or anxiety is causing the stomach pain, the scale 1 patient doesn't feel relieved. They feel furious.
They will immediately terminate the relationship with that doctor. The manual notes they will relentlessly doctor shop until they find a physician willing to validate their physical illness.
But the manual also highlights what happens when someone scores incredibly low on scale 1, like a T-score plunging below 45.
Yes, this is a fascinating nuance.
You'd think that just means they are healthy. But the psychological interpretation is much deeper.
A very low score reveals an active, almost militant denial of physical vulnerability.
Right. The manual points out that this is often the baseline score for medical professionals, nurses, and interestingly, the children of medical professionals.
Yes.
Why is that? Why would a nurse score lower than an average person?
Because they spend their entire lives surrounded by illness. They see people suffering, but they also see people using illness manipulatively, like those high scale 1 patients.
Right. They see the manipulation firsthand.
So they develop a subconscious aversion to being associated with that weakness. Therefore, they brush off their own symptoms. They go to work with a fever. They deny their own physical frailty.
The manual also notes this counterphobic defense is common in intense health food enthusiasts or extreme marathon runners.
Right, people who view any physical illness as a personal moral failing.
That is fascinating. The denial of the body is just as revealing as the obsession with it. But let's look at the partner to this scale. Scale 3, hysteria.
This one has a deep history.
It really does. It's 60 items, and the history here is deeply rooted in early 20th century psychology.
The term hysteria is antiquated now, but in the 1930s and 40s when the MMPI was developed, it referred to what we now call conversion disorders.
Which is a profound, almost unbelievable psychological phenomenon.
It truly is.
The manual calls it the great imitator. We are talking about situations where immense, unbearable psychological stress literally converts into a dramatic physical symptom.
Physical paralysis, fainting, speech loss.
Right. We're talking about hysterical blindness, sudden paralysis of a limb, pseudo-seizures, and again, multiple neurologists will examine the patient and confirm there is zero organic damage.
The hardware is perfectly fine. The software is shutting it down.
Exactly. We have to explore the mechanism of why the brain does this.
And conversion is the ultimate circuit breaker. When a person is faced with a psychological conflict or a trauma that is so terrifying, so fundamentally incompatible with their conscious sense of self that it threatens to destroy their sanity.
The brain just steps in.
It isolates that emotional terror and diverts the energy into the physical motor network.
The body takes a hit so the conscious mind doesn't have to shatter.
Precisely. The paralysis of the arm is the solution to the psychological conflict. If you are paralyzed, you can't be expected to face the stressful situation.
But here's where Scale 3 diverges wildly from Scale 1, and this is where the genius of the MMPI-2 really shines.
Yes, the secondary cluster.
Scale 3 shares those somatic complaint items, but it contains a secondary, entirely distinct cluster of items.
And those items are completely paradoxical.
They really are. The Scale 3 items declare an intense social extroversion, a complete denial of bashfulness, and an aggressive, cheerful denial of any emotional difficulties whatsoever.
Let's put these pieces together. A person scoring high on Scale 3 is effectively telling the test, I am experiencing severe physical symptoms. I might be prone to fainting or weakness, while simultaneously bubbling in, I love everyone, my life is perfectly happy, and I have absolutely no anxiety or sadness.
It sounds like a massive contradiction. How can someone be physically collapsing but claiming absolute emotional euphoria?
It's defined by a classic psychological concept mentioned in the manual, labile indifference.
The beautiful indifference.
Yes. Because the brain has so successfully converted the emotional terror into a physical symptom, the conscious mind is entirely swept clean of distress. They have repressed the conflict so deeply that they genuinely do not feel anxious.
So they are sitting in a wheelchair with a paralyzed leg, and if you ask them how they're doing, they smile radiantly and say, oh, I'm wonderful, everyone is so nice to me, it's just this silly leg acting up.
Exactly. They exhibit this curious, almost eerie lack of concern about their own dramatic physical symptoms.
Wow.
The manual describes these individuals as highly repressed, naive, and desperate for affection and social approval. They are ultimate people-pleasers who view the world through rose-colored glasses to avoid acknowledging any dark or conflict-driven reality.
The manual says they look but don't see. They listen but don't hear.
That's a great summary.
And the clinical interpretation hinges on how Scale 1 and Scale 3 interact on the graph, doesn't it?
It does. This is where we see the nuances of the somatic defense. If a patient's Scale 1 is significantly higher than their Scale 3, the psychological profile is dark and abrasive.
This is the classic complainer.
Yes. They are cynical, defeatist, and they use their pain as a weapon to punish the people around them. They make everyone miserable.
But if you flip the graph, if Scale 3 is significantly higher than Scale 1, the entire dynamic shifts.
They still have the mysterious ailments, but their personality is optimistic, talkative, socially skilled, and almost seductive in their approach.
They want the doctor to like them.
Exactly. They want the therapist to think they are a wonderful, sweet person who's just tragically afflicted by this physical malady.
You know, I want you, the listener, to really internalize this, because this isn't just about clinical impatience. Think about the dynamics in your own family or workplace.
We all see it.
Right. We all know someone who develops a severe, mysterious migraine or a sudden back spasm the exact moment a massive emotional conflict arises.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you try to address the underlying tension, they smile tightly and say, everything is fine, we are all so happy, I just need to lie down. The body is keeping the score. creating an exit strategy for a mind that is too terrified to engage in the conflict.
It is an elegant, highly effective, yet ultimately dysfunctional defense mechanism.
No defense mechanism lasts forever.
Yeah,
No.
eventually they fail.
You can only convert so much stress into a backache. You can only maintain the tailored suit of the K-scale for so long. Eventually the defenses fail. The dam breaks.
And when it does, the underlying pain floods the system.
Which moves us now to the most frequently elevated scale in clinical populations. Scale 2. Depression.
Scale 2 is an exhaustive 57-item mood scale. It operates differently than the trait-based scales we've discussed. While the L scale measures a lifelong rigid personality structure, Scale 2 is highly volatile. It is an exquisitely sensitive thermometer for a person's current emotional state.
The manual explicitly notes that this scale measures the exact degree of sadness and pessimism a person is feeling at the specific moment they are taking the test.
Yes.
So a chronic, lifelong, major depressive disorder could spike this scale, but so could the acute, devastating grief of a sudden bereavement that happened, like, 2 weeks ago.
And again, we look at the empirical origins. The developers identified these 57 items by comparing the test results of normal functioning individuals to a group of 50 psychiatric patients who are actively trapped in the depressed phase of manic depressive psychosis.
Wow. And when we look at the T-scores here, things get very interesting, particularly in the moderate ranges.
They do.
We know what a high score means. A T-score climbing over 65 indicates pessimism, low self-esteem, deep worry, and social withdrawal.
Right. And above an 80, you are looking at severe immobilizing clinical depression.
But the manual points out a counterintuitive truth about moderate elevations.
Yes, a moderate score, a T-score between 60 and 70 in an otherwise healthy non-clinical profile doesn't mean the person is just mildly depressed.
The manual says this specific elevation is incredibly common in scientists, mathematicians, physicists, and engineers.
It is.
But why is a math professor scoring higher on the depression scale than a sales rep?
To understand that, we have to look at the underlying psychological dimension of the scale, which is fundamentally about evaluation.
Evaluation.
Yes, it is the cognitive process of intensely sorting out good from bad, right from wrong, accurate from inaccurate.
Okay, that makes sense for an engineer.
In a healthy, functioning mind, a slight elevation in this evaluative dimension manifests as a serious, analytical, and highly contemplative personality. They take their responsibilities very seriously.
They calculate risks.
Exactly. They don't just blindly leap into things with reckless optimism.
So it's not sadness, it's gravity. It's seriousness.
Exactly. It's only when that analytical brain is subjected to overwhelming stress or trauma that the evaluative function turns inward and becomes toxic. The analytical nature curdles into relentless self-criticism, guilt, and paralyzing worry.
And on the other end of the spectrum, a very low score on scale 2. A T-score dropping below 45 indicates someone who is wildly cheerful, deeply optimistic, and supremely self-confident.
Yes, but the manual issues a stark warning here as well. It says you cannot just look at that low score and say, great, they are happy.
You have to look at the whole profile.
If the depression score is abnormally low and a scale like scale 9 hypomania is highly elevated, that low depression score is actually a massive clinical red flag.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't mean they are joyfully healthy. It means they possess a terrifying lack of impulse control. It often indicates a bipolar individual currently cresting into a manic phase. They are entirely disconnected from the reality of consequence. They are too buoyant.
This brings us to a crucial question about how we actually treat someone. Let's say a patient comes into a clinic and their scale 2 is elevated to an 80. They are severely depressed.
Right.
But depression isn't just one thing, right? You could have two people with a T-score of 80, and one of them is crying all day and pacing the room, while the other is staring blankly at a wall, completely unable to move or speak. How does the test break this down?
This is where we zoom in with a microscope.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the test breaks the overarching depression scale down into 5 highly specific subscales.
The Harris-Lingo subscales.
Yes, they dissect the exact flavor and architecture of the patient's melancholy.
Let's weave through these, because this is where the test turns into a true psychological map. Let's say our patient is just engulfed in profound, pure misery. They feel useless, they cry easily, they just feel a heavy, dark cloud over their existence.
The clinician would look immediately at subscale D1, subjective depression. This is a 32-item cluster that captures the core conscious experience of unhappiness. High scorers here are telling the test, I lack the energy to cope, My sleep is broken, my appetite is gone, and I feel fundamentally inferior to everyone around me.
So it's the raw emotional pain.
Yes, D1 is the most volatile subscale. It fluctuates daily based on mood.
But what if the patient isn't necessarily crying? What if the dominant feature of their depression is that they simply cannot get out of bed? They aren't actively weeping, they are just paralyzed.
That maps to subscale D2, psychomotor retardation.
What does that measure exactly?
This subscale measures physical immobilization and profound social withdrawal. This patient isn't just sad, they are inhibited.
Yeah.
They avoid all social contact, not necessarily out of self-hatred, but because the physical act of interacting requires a vigor and initiative that their nervous system can no longer supply. Interestingly, the manual notes that high D2 scores actively deny any hostile or aggressive impulses. They are utterly passive.
Then we have patients whose depression manifests almost entirely in their bodies. They might deny feeling sad, but they are dropping weight, they're constantly weak, their digestive system has ground to a halt.
That is captured by D3, physical malfunctioning.
This sounds a lot like the somatic stuff we talked about earlier.
It does. It correlates heavily with the hypochondriasis scale we discussed. The D3 patient is preoccupied with their failing physical health and harbors a dark, quiet fear that their body is permanently broken.
I want to talk about D4 because I think this is an aspect of depression that is so rarely depicted in movies or media.
Yes, D4. Mental dullness.
Right. Mental dullness captures the cognitive debility of depression, the mental fog.
When a patient elevates D4, they are experiencing a terrifying inability to process information. They read the same paragraph in a book 5 times and retain nothing.
Their memory is fragmented.
They cannot concentrate at work. Every minor decision feels like trying to solve advanced calculus. They often feel like they are literally losing their mind or that early onset dementia has taken hold simply because the depression is siphoning off all their cognitive bandwidth.
And finally, we have the patient who is restless. They aren't immobilized in bed. They are pacing the floor at 3 a.m., completely consumed by dark thoughts they cannot stop playing on a loop.
That requires looking at DeFi. Brooding.
Rumination.
Yes. This subscale measures rumination. It is less about a lack of energy and much more about the horrifying feeling of losing control over one's own thought processes. DeFi combines misery with agitation.
Right.
These individuals are highly irritable, hypersensitive to criticism, and consumed by a recurring thought that life is fundamentally meaningless and unfixable.
It is incredible how the test can take a single score of depression and split it like a prism into subjective misery, physical immobilization, vegetative breakdown, mental fog, and agitated brooding.
It is incredibly detailed.
But there's another split within Scale 2 that completely blew my mind when I read this source document. It's the concept of the subtle versus obvious subscales.
The Wiener-Harman subscales. This is arguably one of the most profound psychometric insights in the entire manual.
Let me set this up. The obvious items on the depression scale are exactly what you would intuitively expect. Items like, I cry easily, or I feel useless. If you answer true, you are obviously depressed.
Right.
But the test developers discovered a cluster of items, the subtle scale, or DS, that mathematically correlate with depression. But the questions have absolutely nothing to do with feeling sad.
The manual reveals that the subtle depression scale is actually a measure of the inhibition of crude effect.
Let's unpack that deeply. What does it mean to inhibit crude effect, and why does it lead to depression?
Crude effect refers to our raw, primal, aggressive emotions. Anger, frustration, assertiveness, the instinct to fight back when wronged.
Okay.
People who score extremely high on the subtle depression scale are individuals who systematically, relentlessly suppress those raw emotions.
So they don't fight back.
They are subassertive, they are entirely passive, they tolerate domination from their spouses, from their bosses, from their families, without ever raising their voice or defending their boundaries.
They swallow their anger every single time.
Yes. They view any expression of irritability or aggression as unacceptable. They never allow themselves to feel euphoric, but they also never allow themselves to feel furious. They live in a tightly controlled, gray, emotional bandwidth.
And the manual suggests that this deep systemic passivity is actually a predisposition to clinical depression. It's the architecture of the collapse before the house actually falls down.
It is the psychological precursor.
Wow.
If you spend 20 years tolerating domination, constantly inhibiting your natural aggressive impulses, and never allowing yourself to assert your own needs, that unexpressed energy doesn't just vanish, it turns inward. It collapses upon the self.
That makes a lot of sense.
Freud famously conceptualized depression as anger turned inward, and the DS scale empirically measures the exact degree to which a person is engaged in that dangerous inward suppression.
Which brings us to the most urgent, high-stakes application of this test, the assessment of suicide risk.
This is critical.
If we have a patient who is deeply suppressed, intensely brooding, and trapped in subjective misery, how does the clinician use this massive data set to predict if they're going to take their own life?
The manual addresses this with absolute clinical sobriety. It begins with a definitive statement that every psychologist is taught. The MMPI-2 cannot predict suicide. No single test in existence can.
Let's clarify why, because with 567 questions mapping out every corner of the psyche, it feels like it should be able to flag a suicide attempt.
The inability to predict a specific suicidal act is rooted in statistical mathematics, specifically something called the base rate problem.
The base rate problem?
Yes. In any given population, the actual act of completing suicide is statistically rare. It has a very low base rate. When you try to design a test to predict a very rare event, the mathematics dictate that you will generate a massive number of false positives. You will flag thousands of people who are in pain, but who will never actually make an attempt.
And beyond the statistics, the manual notes the rapidly shifting variables.
Yes.
A test taken on a Tuesday morning cannot account for the fact that on Thursday night, the patient might experience a sudden job loss, a sudden spike in intractable physical pain, or a sudden bout of severe alcohol intoxication that instantly strips away their impulse control.
The final, fatal act is often triggered by acute, real-time variables that a psychometric test cannot foresee. However, the manual is clear that while the test cannot predict the act, it is an unparalleled tool for estimating suicide potential and uncovering deep suicidal ideation.
It provides the clinician with a risk assessment mosaic.
Exactly. The test gives you the tiles. The clinician builds the mosaic. There are, of course, specific items that directly ask about suicidal thoughts, which provide immediate red flags. But the true power of the test lies in cross-referencing the subscales we just discussed.
Okay, what's the biggest red flag there?
The most dangerous intersection in the entire MMPI-2 profile is the relationship between D1, subjective depression, and D2, psychomotor retardation.
This is a terrifying paradox. Walk us through what happens when those two subscales mismatch.
Let's say a patient's D1 is off the charts. They are in absolute excruciating psychic agony. They loathe their existence.
Okay.
But their D2 score is extremely high as well. They are totally immobilized. They cannot get out of bed. In a grim sense, that physical immobilization is temporarily protecting them.
Because they just don't have the energy.
They simply lack the physical energy and the executive function to plan and execute a suicide attempt.
But what happens when the D2 score drops, but the D1 misery stays high?
That is the moment of maximum clinical peril, and this often happens early in treatment. Perhaps they start a new antidepressant or they begin therapy, and the very first thing to improve is their physical energy.
The psychomotor retardation lifts.
Yes. Suddenly they can get out of bed, they can drive a car, they have initiative again. But the medication hasn't yet touched the D1 subjective misery.
So they are still in absolute agony, but now they have the physical energy and the cognitive focus to do something about it.
Precisely. The MMPI-2 allows the clinician to see that specific, dangerous intersection of intense psychic pain and returning physical energy, alerting them that the risk of a suicide attempt has just exponentially increased, even though the patient might outwardly appear to be doing better because they are finally out of bed.
Wow. It's heavy, and it's humbling to see the mechanics of human suffering laid out with such mathematical precision.
It is a profound instrument.
We have journeyed through an incredible landscape today. We've looked at the hidden architecture of the MMPI-2, guided by the underground manual of Skya 509.
A truly unique guide.
We started by exploring how the therapeutic history form provides the vital context of our early conditioning, proving that our psychological data means nothing without our human story.
The narrative matters.
And then we saw how the validity scales, the L, the K, the S, and the F act as an unblinking security system, catching our naive moral lies, our sophisticated tailored defenses, and our desperate pleas for help.
Catching us from every angle.
We explored scales 1 and 3, hypochondriasis and hysteria, unpacking the neurological magic trick of conversion, where the mind sacrifices the physical body to protect itself from emotional terror.
The circuit breakers.
And we just mapped the geography of melancholy with scale 2, realizing that depression is a complex matrix of mental fog, physical malfunctioning, and the dangerous, quiet quiet inhibition of our own raw emotions.
As you process all of this information, it is crucial to remember that these scales are not just for clinical inpatients or forensic evaluation.
Right, they apply to all of us.
These scales map the universal human condition. We all have a bit of the L scale operating when we go on a first date and pretend we don't have any messy habits.
That's right.
We all utilize the sophisticated K scale when we button up our emotions and project absolute competence to survive a stressful board meeting. We all occasionally experience the D4 mental fog, the D5 midnight brooding, or the scale 3 mysterious stomachache when we are desperate to avoid a painful confrontation.
We are all on this graph somewhere. The traits are universal. It's only the elevation that defines the pathology.
Exactly.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you, our listener, with one final overarching thought to mull over.
Throughout this entire deep dive, we have discussed how this magnificent test was designed to measure what we know about ourselves. It measures our reported symptoms, our conscious complaints, our recognized moods.
So the things we can actually verbalize.
Right. But the true genius of the MMPI-2, the reason it has survived and remained the global gold standard since the 1940s, lies in its unparalleled ability to measure what we absolutely refuse to know about ourselves. It is an instrument designed to map our blind spots.
Which raises a profound philosophical question.
It does.
If a simple paper and pencil booklet containing 567 true or false questions can mathematically detect the exact shape of our self-deception.
If it can trace the precise contours of the anger we swore we had buried, or mathematically reveal the panic we are desperately trying to hide behind a tailored suit of rationality.
What does that mean for the ancient directive to know thyself?
It suggests that pure introspection might be an illusion. Can we ever truly self-report accurately? Or is our deepest, most authentic truth always hiding inside the exact things we vigorously, instinctively, and repeatedly deny?
So the next time you think you have someone completely figured out, or perhaps more importantly, the next time you are entirely convinced that you have yourself figured out, remember the mechanics of the psychological X-ray machine. Sometimes the jagged white line isn't located where you feel the pain. Sometimes the most profound injury is located in the exact place you absolutely refuse to look. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the unofficial MMPI-2 Supermanual. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep exploring the hidden mechanics of the mind, and keep looking for the deeper truth hiding behind the defenses. Until next time.